to listen, to feel, to be with them. Not because you figured it all out, but because you're done running, you're done pretending, you're done abandoning the very part of you that has been holding your truth all along. And so you begin the slow journey of returning, of remembering, of rebuilding the bridge between your outer life and your inner world. It starts small. You begin by noticing how you speak to yourself when no one's listening, noticing the way your body tightens when you ignore your needs, noticing the way you say yes when your whole being screams no. These moments of noticing are not trivial. They are the beginning of liberation, because what you see, you can begin to shift. What you name, you can begin to reclaim. You realize that self-abandonment doesn't always look dramatic. Sometimes it looks like brushing off your own intuition, like staying in a room that feels wrong, like smiling when your heart is breaking, like silencing yourself to avoid conflict. But you also begin to realize that self-loyalty doesn't require perfection. It just requires presence, the choice to pause, the courage to listen, the willingness to try again. And each time you choose yourself, each time you soften toward your own pain instead of turning away, you rebuild trust with the parts of you that were once left behind. This trust is not fast. It doesn't come with declarations. It comes with consistency, with the daily practice of saying, I will not leave you even when it's hard. It comes with holding yourself through discomfort, through uncertainty, through old habits that still try to pull you back into hiding. You learn to forgive yourself for the times you forgot. You learn to offer grace to the version of you that didn't yet know how to stay. And slowly, the parts of you that were shut down, shamed, silenced, they begin to open again. They begin to trust your voice, your choices, your presence, and you begin to feel different, not in an explosive way, not like flipping a switch, but like settling into a rhythm that finally matches your own. You speak more slowly, you respond instead of react. You create more space around your thoughts. You notice beauty where you used to overlook it. You feel the sun on your face and it moves you. You hear laughter and it brings tears to your eyes. You begin to feel alive, not in the way that comes from adrenaline or validation, but in the way that comes from being fully here, fully you. And in this presence, you start to reconnect with your needs, not as indulgences, but as essential truths. You realize you're allowed to rest without earning it. You're allowed to feel without explaining it. You're allowed to want more without feeling guilty for it. These are not selfish acts. These are sacred acts. Acts of remembrance, acts of repair, acts of coming home. And that home, it's not a destination. It's not a perfect state of being. It's a relationship with yourself that says, I am enough even when I'm unraveling. I am worthy even when I'm a mess. I am lovable even when I forget how to love myself. And when you live from that place, not as an idea, but as a lived truth, your entire life begins to reflect it. Your relationships shift, your choices deepen, your boundaries soften, not because you're less clear, but because you're more compassionate. You stop needing people to complete you because you've remembered that you were never incomplete. You stop fearing solitude because it no longer feels like abandonment. It feels like communion. You stop defining your worth by your productivity because you finally feel valuable just for being. And in that value, you begin to trust your rhythm. You stop comparing your pace to others. You stop measuring your healing by how happy you appear. You start asking better questions, not, am I doing enough? But, am I listening to what I need? Not, why am I not there yet? But, what is this moment asking of me? And maybe what this moment asks is not more effort, but more ease. Not more doing, but more being. Not more answers, but more curiosity. So you begin to live the questions. You hold space for the unknown. You make peace with the not yet. You let yourself be in between who you were and who you're becoming, without trying to rush through it. And in that pause, in that sacred space of transition, you discover something you weren't expecting. You're okay. You're okay even without certainty. You're okay even without clarity. You're okay because you are with yourself, and that is what matters most. And from that place, from that rooted okayness, you begin to grow. Not in a way that feels pressured or performative, but in a way that feels natural, like a flower that opens because the sun is warm and the soil is soft, like a tree that stretches toward the sky because it knows instinctively, not the you the world conditioned you to be, not the you shaped by trauma or fear, but the you who has always been there, underneath it all, the one who still knows how to wonder, the one who still dreams in color, the one who feels everything deeply and wants to be held in return. And this return to self, it's not a one-time event, it's a lifelong journey, a devotion, a practice. There will be days when you forget, when the old patterns feel easier, when you slip back into survival mode. That's okay. The path is not linear. Healing is not a straight line. It's a spiral. You come back to the same places again and again, but each time with more awareness, more compassion, more grace. You learn to hold yourself through the forgetting. You learn to forgive yourself for needing time. You stop making healing another thing you have to perform perfectly. You stop turning it into another task on your to-do list. Instead, it becomes your way of being, your way of relating, your way of breathing. And breath, you realize, is everything. It's the anchor that brings you back to the now. It's the reminder that you're alive, that no matter what you've been through, you're still here, still standing, still becoming. And that in itself is worthy of celebration. You stop waiting for the world to celebrate you. You stop waiting for the perfect moment to feel proud. You start honoring your journey in the small, quiet ways. The way you held space for your own tears. The way you chose rest instead of burnout. The way you walked away when staying would have destroyed you. The way you chose softness when anger felt easier. The way you kept going, even when it felt like you were going nowhere. These moments matter. They are the real milestones. They are the evidence that you are healing. Even if no one sees it, even if no one claps, even if it's messy and slow and hard to explain, you see it, you feel it, you honor it. And in that honoring, you build something unshakable, a foundation of self-trust, of inner safety, of peace that doesn't rely on circumstances. You start to find joy in the ordinary, not because life has suddenly become perfect, but because you've learned to look for the beauty that's always been there, in the way sunlight dances on your skin, in the way your favorite song feels like home, in the smell of rain, in the warmth of tea, in the softness of your own breath. These are not small things. These are the heartbeat of life, and you are finally present enough to notice them, not because you've escaped your pain, but because you've embraced your presence. You understand now that you don't need to fix everything to be worthy of love. You don't need to have all the answers to be safe. You don't need to be anyone but who you are in this moment. And who you are is enough, more than enough. There's a kind of loneliness that doesn't come from being without people, but from being without yourself. You can be surrounded by noise, drenched in conversation, busy with the rhythm of life, and still feel like you're nowhere to be found. This is a particular ache, one that hums beneath the surface of even the most seemingly fulfilled lives. And the reason it cuts so deep is because it's not about missing someone else. It's about missing your own presence, your own voice, your own truth. It's the moment you realize you become a stranger to yourself. Having been so busy attending to the world, responding to expectations, performing roles that never really fit, you lose your edges in service of harmony. You quiet your needs to avoid disappointing others. You abandon your longings because you've learned to prioritize survival over authenticity. And when you do that enough times, over enough years, the distance between you and your soul becomes so wide, you forget what it feels like to be at home inside yourself. But there comes a moment, a quiet, trembling moment, when you can no longer bear the weight of that disconnection. Maybe it's a breakdown, maybe it's a loss, maybe it's something small, like the way your breath catches in your throat when someone asks, "How are you really?" And you realize you have no idea. That moment is not your failure. That moment is your opening, the crack in the wall that lets the light through. It's the moment your soul whispers, "Come back to me." Not with guilt, not with urgency, but with longing, with love, because your soul never stopped calling for you, even when you stopped answering. And when you begin to listen again, not just to your thoughts, but to the deeper knowing that lies beneath them, you start to feel something stir, something ancient, something true. The real you, and that real you, they don't speak in timelines or expectations. They don't care about whether you've lived up to the world's standards. They don't need you to be impressive. They only want your presence, your honesty, your breath. They want to know that you're willing to sit down beside them and stay, that it is supported from below. You grow because it is safe to do so, because you have created safety within, because you have stopped demanding that the world give you what you now give yourself, permission to bloom. And bloom you do, in your own way, in your own time, not for anyone else, not for applause, but because blooming is what you were always meant to do. There's something powerful that happens when you stop trying to be understood by everyone. Something deeply freeing when you no longer shape yourself to fit the expectations of those who haven't taken the time to know you, who only see you through the narrow lens of their own judgments or projections. You begin to realize that so much of your suffering came not from being misunderstood, but from trying so hard to be seen by people who were never looking with eyes of love. And slowly, as this truth sinks deeper into your bones, you stop explaining yourself. You stop justifying your feelings. You stop breaking your truth into smaller, more palatable pieces, just so it can be more easily digested by others. You stop whispering when your voice was meant to be heard. And this, strangely enough, is where the real connection begins. Not when you contort yourself for acceptance, but when you remain rooted in your truth, regardless of how others receive it. The relationships that survive that level of honesty are the ones that are built on soul, not illusion. The ones that fall away were never truly yours. They were attached to your performance, not your presence. And yes, that falling away hurts. It always does. But with every ending comes an opening. With every door that closes behind you, space is made for something truer to enter, something quieter, something real. You begin to realize that solitude is not loneliness. It's intimacy. Intimacy with yourself. Intimacy with the world in a way that isn't filtered through distraction or external validation. You sit with your own company and it no longer feels empty. In fact, it feels like finally arriving somewhere you didn't even know you were missing. You learn to love the stillness, not because it's always easy, but because it's always honest. There's no pretending in silence, no hiding in solitude. It shows you what's been avoided. It shows you what you actually feel when there's no one to perform for. And at first that's confronting, but then it's comforting, because when you finally meet yourself without filters or noise, you discover that you're not nearly as broken as you once believed. You begin to meet the version of you that existed before the world tried to tame you. The version of you that still knows how to dream without asking for permission. The version of you that still feels everything deeply and doesn't apologize for it. That self was never gone, only buried beneath years of conditioning, pain, and forgetting. And now that you're remembering, now that the layers are peeling back, you can start to live from that place again. Not naively, but courageously. Not as someone who has never known hardship, but as someone who has learned to carry softness through the storm. That softness becomes your strength. It becomes your superpower. Because it's easy to harden, it's easy to close off, it's easy to build walls and call it self-protection. But to stay open after everything, to feel deeply and still show up with love, that's courage, that's resilience, that's healing. And healing doesn't mean you'll never get triggered again. It doesn't mean you'll never feel overwhelmed or afraid. It means you now have the tools to return, the awareness to pause, the self-compassion to stay with yourself instead of abandoning yourself when things get hard. You stop blaming yourself for having emotions. You stop expecting yourself to always get it right. You understand that growth is not a straight line. It's a spiral, a dance, a rhythm that sometimes moves forward, sometimes pulls you back, but always brings you deeper. And deeper is where the real transformation lives. Not on the surface, not in appearance, not in what the world claps for, but in the quiet inner shifts, in the way you hold yourself when no one's watching, in the way you breathe through the discomfort instead of running from it, in the way you love yourself, even when the old story is trying to convince you not to. Because those old stories will come back. They always do. The voices that say you're too much or not enough. the doubts that echo from past wounds, the fears that rise when you dare to choose a different path. But now, instead of believing them, you meet them with curiosity. You ask, is this true? You ask, whose voice is this? And more often than not, you realize it's not yours. It never was. It was the voice of a teacher who didn't know how to nurture, the voice of a parent who projected their own pain, the voice of a society that profits from your insecurity. And now you're learning how to replace those voices with your own. The voice that says, I am allowed to take up space. The voice that says, I don't have to earn rest. The voice that says, I trust my timing. The voice that says, I am still worthy, even when I am still becoming. This reclamation of voice is not loud. It's not about screaming into the void. It's about speaking softly to yourself with words that heal, words that root you, words that remind you of who you are beneath the performance. And as that voice strengthens, so does your sense of self. You stop looking for yourself in other people. You stop waiting for someone to save you, to complete you, to validate your existence. You become your own sanctuary, your own source, your own soft place to land. And from that place, you begin to love differently, not from need, but from overflow, not from fear, but from freedom. You're no longer afraid of losing someone because you've stopped losing yourself. You no longer shrink to fit into someone else's idea of love. You expand, you become. You offer love as a gift, not a transaction. And you accept love not because it fills a void, but because it adds to the fullness you've already cultivated within. And this love, this deep inner love, it changes everything. Not because it fixes all your problems, not because it erases your past, but because it gives you the strength to hold it all with grace, with gentleness, with presence. You understand now that life isn't about avoiding pain. It's about learning how to hold it with compassion. It's not about reaching some final destination. It's about staying awake through the journey. It's not about becoming someone else. It's about becoming more yourself. You are no longer seeking outside of you for what you've always carried within. You are no longer molding yourself into shapes that don't feel true. You are no longer walking through life with a mask you no longer need. You are home, not in the sense of arrival, but in the sense of belonging, to your breath, to your truth, to your now. And that is the most sacred place you can ever be. There is a quiet kind of strength that begins to rise when you stop measuring your life by how much you've achieved and start measuring it by how much you've felt. When the focus shifts from becoming someone in the world to becoming someone to yourself. That kind of inner transformation isn't something you can capture in a picture or explain neatly in a sentence. It's not loud, it's not linear, and yet it's the most important kind of change. The change that happens when you begin to live from the inside out instead of the outside in. At first, this shift can feel disorienting because for so long, you've been trained to believe that your value lies in what you do, in what you produce, in how much you give, how perfectly you show up, how well you follow the rules. You've been praised for being reliable, for being selfless, for putting others first. And maybe you wore those words like a badge of honor. Maybe you believed that being good meant being small, being kind meant being quiet, being strong meant never needing help. But eventually, that version of strength begins to break down. Not because you failed, but because your soul is tired of pretending, tired of shrinking, tired of holding up a version of yourself that no longer feels like home. And so quietly, you begin to release the performance. You begin to lay down the armor. You begin to let go of the roles that never fit, but you wore anyway because it felt safer than the unknown. You start to ask harder questions, questions that don't have easy answers but need to be asked anyway. Questions like, what do I want? What do I need? What would my life look like if I stopped living it for everyone else? Those questions are the doorway to truth. They crack open the shell of who you thought you had to be and make space for who you really are to breathe. And what you find beneath the surface isn't weakness. It isn't selfishness. It's longing. It's light. It's the part of you that remembers. The part of you that still knows how to feel deeply, to love freely, to trust instinctively. That part has been waiting, through all the years of striving and silencing, for you to come back, not as punishment, but as invitation. as a chance to begin again. And so you do, not all at once, not with certainty, but with presence, with honesty, with the kind of self-compassion that says, I may not have known better then, but I do now, and I'm ready to listen. You begin to reparent yourself. You speak to yourself the way you always needed someone to speak to you. You stop abandoning yourself when things get hard. You start holding space for the parts of you that still tremble, the parts that still flinch when they remember the pain, the parts that still wonder if they're too much or not enough. This inner holding is what transforms everything. Because when you become a safe place for yourself, you stop looking for safety in people who were never capable of offering it. You stop trying to fix yourself for someone else's comfort. You stop trying to earn your place in the world. You already belong. You already are enough. And when that knowing sinks deeper than your fear, you become unshakable. Not because life stops hurting, but because you stop running. And what a gift that is, to no longer run, to stay with yourself when the shame rises, when the old thoughts creep in, when the body remembers things the mind wants to forget. You stay, you breathe, you ground, you feel. You no longer shame yourself for hurting. You no longer rush to get over it. You understand now that healing doesn't happen in tidy timelines. It doesn't follow a checklist. It unfolds, it deepens. It moves like water, sometimes fast, sometimes slow, always flowing. And you let yourself flow with it. You let yourself feel joy without guilt. You let yourself rest without apology. You let yourself speak even when your voice shakes. You let yourself take up space even when it makes others uncomfortable. Not because you're trying to prove something, but because you've remembered that your life is your own, that remembering changes everything. You begin to live differently. You listen more closely to what your body needs, to what your soul is asking for. You make decisions based not on fear, but on alignment. You no longer say yes when you mean no. You no longer pretend to be fine when you're falling apart. You stop keeping peace that costs you your own. You stop calling self-betrayal love. And maybe the most beautiful part? You start creating a life that actually feels like yours. A life that reflects your truth, not your trauma. A life that honors your energy, not your conditioning. A life that is built on authenticity, not on survival. And that life may not look impressive from the outside. It may not come with titles or trophies, but it will feel like peace, like freedom, like home. And that home, it's not made of walls. It's made of presence, of breath, of moments when you choose yourself again and again and again. Even when it's hard, especially then. Because healing isn't about feeling good all the time. It's about feeling fully. It's about choosing to stay when everything in you wants to escape. It's about being honest with yourself when the truth is inconvenient. It's about allowing your heart to open even when it's been broken. It's about learning to trust your own voice after years of doubting it. And you are learning. Every single day. You're learning how to forgive yourself for what you didn't know. You're learning how to honor the small victories. You're learning how to be proud of yourself, not because someone else said you should be, but because you feel it in your bones. You're learning how to live in your body again, how to speak your truth without fear, how to hold joy without waiting for the other shoe to drop. You're learning how to be soft and strong at the same time. And in that learning, you are becoming not someone new, but someone true. You're peeling back the layers. You're shedding the masks. You're releasing the need to be anything other than who you are right now. And who you are in this very moment is enough. Not someday, not when you're more healed or more successful or more certain. Now this breath, this body, this becoming, it's all enough. Sometimes the most profound transformation doesn't come with fireworks or the dramatic turning of a page. It comes in a whisper. It comes in the stillness between breaths, in the quiet realization that you've been walking through life wearing shoes that don't fit. And maybe they were given to you. Maybe they were passed down by a parent or an old belief system. Maybe you were told those shoes would carry you where you needed to go. Maybe you believed that discomfort was just a sign of discipline, of being good, of being successful. But after miles and miles of running in those shoes, you start to feel the blisters. You start to feel the ache. You start to wonder if you've been molding yourself into someone else's idea of enough. And then something breaks, not in a way that destroys you, but in a way that sets you free. You wake up one morning and realize you're exhausted, not from doing too much, but from not doing what feels true. You've said yes too many times when your entire body was saying no. You've been bending yourself into 1,000 different shapes for approval, and now you don't even recognize your own outline. So you stop. Not because everything is finally perfect, not because you have a grand plan, but because your soul is tired of pretending, tired of hustling, tired of hiding, and that single pause, that breath of awareness, is the beginning of something sacred. You begin to question what you've been chasing. You begin to ask if the things you've been taught to want are really what your heart craves. And when you ask those questions honestly, with open hands and an open heart, the answers come, not always in words, but in sensations. In the way your stomach knots when you're out of alignment, in the way your chest opens when you speak your truth, in the way your spirit softens when you stop performing and just allow yourself to be. That's where your wisdom lives, not in the noise, but in the noticing. Not in control, but in connection. And connection starts with you. You begin to look at yourself differently. You see the younger version of you who tried so hard to be what everyone else needed. You see the you who wore smiles like armor and stayed quiet to avoid confrontation. You see the version of you who was so desperate to be chosen, they forgot they had the right to choose themselves. And instead of judging those versions, you begin to love them. You begin to thank them because they were doing their best. They were doing what they were taught. And now you get to choose something different. Not because they were wrong, but because you're ready to live in alignment, not in survival. You realize that healing doesn't mean becoming someone new. It means shedding what was never yours to carry. The guilt that doesn't belong to you. The shame that was handed down but never questioned. The belief that your worth depends on your output. You start to let it all go. Not all at once, but layer by layer, breath by breath. And each time you let something go, you make space. Space for truth, space for softness, space for the version of you who doesn't need to prove or perform or pretend. And in that space, you begin to rebuild. Slowly, tenderly, intentionally. You begin to ask yourself different questions. Not, what do they expect of me? But what feels true to me? Not, how can I avoid discomfort? But how can I grow through it? You stop outsourcing your worth to people who can't see your soul. You stop placing your value in things that shift like sand. You begin to root yourself in something deeper, something steadier, something that doesn't need to be earned because it's already yours. That root is self-respect. That root is self-trust. That root is knowing you don't need to be understood by everyone to be whole. You don't need to be perfect to be lovable. You don't need to be everything for everyone to deserve rest. You are already enough, not in some future version, but here, now in the mess, in the learning, in the unraveling. And maybe that's the most beautiful part of healing, not becoming someone else, but remembering who you've always been. The child who was curious, the teenager who dreamed, the adult who still believes in something soft and sacred, even after all the hardness of life. You begin to live not from fear, but from fullness, not from need, but from knowing. You no longer chase validation like it's oxygen. You breathe on your own. You create your own light. You start to show up differently in the world. You no longer force conversations that leave you feeling hollow. You no longer shrink to fit into rooms that don't honor your spirit. You stop betraying yourself for connection. You choose peace over pleasing, truth over politeness, presence over performance. And this doesn't mean you stop loving others. It means you start loving them more honestly, with boundaries, with clarity, with integrity, because you're no longer loving from a wound. You're loving from a well, a deep, steady inner well that gets replenished every time you choose yourself with grace. And the world might not applaud these changes. In fact, some people might resist them. You might lose relationships that were built on your silence. You might confuse people who were only used to a version of you that bent and broke to keep the peace. And that's okay, because you're no longer trading your truth for belonging. You're no longer watering yourself down to be digestible. You are becoming whole, not in spite of your complexity, but because of it. And when you're whole, you begin to attract differently. You begin to see differently. You're no longer pulled toward chaos that mirrors your pain. You're drawn to calm that mirrors your healing. You find joy in places you used to overlook. The way your breath moves through your body, the way the light shifts in the afternoon, the way your heart beats steady even when your mind is racing. These small moments are not small. They are everything. They are signs that you're returning, not to who you were told to be, but to who you truly are. And who you are is not a project, not a problem, not a performance. You are a presence, a process, a poem still being written. You are not here to impress. You are here to express. You are not here to be palatable. You are here to be real, to be raw, to be radiant in your own way. So you keep going, not with force, but with flow, not with pressure, but with permission. Permission to rest, permission to feel, permission to change your mind, permission to come home to yourself again and again and again. And each time you do, the journey deepens, the layers soften, the healing expands. You begin to live in rhythm with your truth. You begin to trust the timing of your becoming. You begin to walk through life not searching for a place to belong, but knowing that you are that place. You are your own home, and you are safe now to live from it. There comes a time when the weight you've carried for so long seems to shift from being a crushing burden to a gentle reminder of the life you've survived. And in that moment, you begin to understand that every scar, every tear, every quiet regret has shaped you into the person who is capable of deep compassion and boundless resilience. You find yourself in a space where the noise of the past no longer drowns out the whispers of your heart, and you realize that the journey of healing is not about erasing what has hurt you, but about embracing every part of your story with tenderness and gratitude. In this space, the cracks in your soul are not seen as failures, but as openings through which the light of your true self can shine, illuminating even the darkest corners with hope. This slow, deliberate coming home to yourself is a process of reclaiming what was always yours, the inherent worth and beauty that the world may have tried to hide, but that has remained quietly persistent deep within you. Now, in the stillness of these moments, you start to notice the subtle shift. The old habits that once tethered you to fear and self-doubt begin to loosen their grip, replaced by a gentle curiosity about what it means to truly be free. You remember that for years you measured your worth by the expectations imposed on you by others. A constant need to perform, to please, to keep up appearances. Yet as you stand in the quiet aftermath of those relentless demands, you discover that your true value is not determined by external accolades or the fleeting opinions of those who pass through your life, but by the quiet strength of your own authenticity. You learn to look into the mirror and see not the many masks you once wore to hide your insecurities, but the person who has borne every challenge with dignity and who, in this very moment, is beginning to live from a place of undeniable truth. The process of letting go, you come to understand, is not an act of surrender, but a deliberate choice to reclaim your energy and focus on what nourishes you. It is the gradual peeling away of layers of judgment, of unrealistic expectations, of the harsh self-talk that once made you feel unworthy. You begin to see that the voice that told you you were never enough was not your own, but a chorus of external criticisms, internalized over time. And so you learn to silence that voice with a gentler one, the voice of compassion and self-acceptance that says, I am here, I am enough, and I will honor every part of who I am. In this space of self-acceptance, every flaw and every imperfection becomes not a mark of failure, but a unique brushstroke in the masterpiece of your life, adding depth and character to the person you are becoming. With each day that you choose to return to yourself, to sit with your feelings, to notice the sensations in your body, to breathe into the spaces that once ached with unresolved pain, you begin to build a sanctuary within. It is a sanctuary not defined by perfection, but by a willingness to be vulnerable, to be present, and to allow yourself the freedom of being fully, unapologetically human. In that sacred space, you no longer feel compelled to chase after a future where everything is flawless, because you've come to understand that every moment, even those filled with uncertainty or sorrow, holds its own quiet miracles. You start to see that the journey of healing is not a destination to be reached, but a continuous unfolding of awareness, where every breath is a chance to renew your commitment to living authentically. As you nurture this inner sanctuary, you find that the connections you form with the world around you begin to shift. Relationships that once felt draining become opportunities for genuine connection because you are no longer trying to fill a void within yourself with the approval or attention of others. Instead, you offer your presence as a gift, allowing others to see you as you truly are. Flawed, yes, but also resilient and capable of great love. And when you hold space for others without demanding that they complete you, you create an environment where both you and those around you can flourish. The simple act of listening, really listening to another person, without the need to interject or fix, becomes a revolutionary act of compassion. In that act of deep presence, you begin to understand that healing is a shared journey. It is a path best walked together, where every encounter holds the potential for transformation, and every soul you meet can teach you something valuable about your own. You also start to see that the habits you once clung to, those endless loops of overthinking, the constant worrying about the future, the self-doubt that whispered you were not good enough, are like old garments that no longer fit. They have kept you warm in a world that was cold and unforgiving, but now they restrict your movement, your expression, your very breath. And so, one by one, you decide to shed them. With each habit you release, you feel lighter, freer, more attuned to the subtle language of your own spirit. You learn that overthinking, rather than bringing clarity, only creates a fog that clouds your judgment and paralyzes your actions. You learn that constant worrying is a thief that robs you of the present, leaving you with a future that is always uncertain. And you learn that self-doubt is not a reflection of your true self, but a mirage, a trick played by the echoes of past disappointments. As you begin to let these habits go, you discover that the space they leave behind is filled with possibility, a wide, open expanse where your true self can emerge and shine. In this process of letting go, you become intimately aware that true freedom is not about having everything under control, but about relinquishing the need to control every detail. It is about embracing the uncertainty of life with an open heart and a curious mind. And you begin to see that the more you try to grip onto things, be it outcomes, relationships, or even your own identity, the more you suffer. In the gentle philosophy of Buddhism, attachment is seen as the root of all suffering, and liberation comes when you learn to let go. And so, you practice. You practice letting go of the need for constant certainty. You practice releasing the tight hold on expectations. You practice embracing the flow of life as it unfolds, trusting that every twist and turn, every joy and every sorrow is part of a larger tapestry that is ultimately leading you to a place of deep inner peace. And then there are the moments when the world seems to stand still, the moments when you're alone with your thoughts, and in that solitude you realize how much you've been living on autopilot. In those moments, you begin to reconnect with the parts of you that have been buried under years of habit, fear, and distraction. You start to remember what it feels like to truly be present, when the only thing that matters is the sound of your breath, the beating of your heart, the softness of the light around you. In that presence, you find a deep reservoir of strength that had always been there, quietly waiting for you to notice. And you drink deeply from that well of calm, feeling your body relax, your mind clear, and your spirit settle into the rhythm of life. With every mindful breath, you forge a deeper connection with the present moment. The chaos of the past and the uncertainty of the future lose their grip as you ground yourself in the only time that truly exists, the now. And in this now, you see that the journey of healing is not a straight line leading to a final destination, but a winding path where every step, every stumble, and every moment of clarity is an integral part of who you are. You begin to embrace the idea that it's okay to not have all the answers, that it's okay to be a work in progress. In fact, you come to realize that there is beauty in the unfolding, in the gradual process of becoming, in the spaces between where everything that is true about you can emerge slowly and with great care. You find solace in the simple rituals that anchor you to the present. Maybe it's the quiet moment before sunrise when the world is still dark and you can hear your own heartbeat. Or perhaps it's the gentle rustle of leaves on a breezy afternoon that reminds you of nature's constant, yet ever-changing embrace. Each of these moments is a reminder that life is not something you have to fix or perfect. It's something you experience moment by moment, breath by breath. And in that experience, you find that the true work of healing is the daily act of returning to yourself, of recognizing that you are already enough, even when you feel so very far from it. As you continue along this path, you learn to let go of the voices of the past that have tried to dictate who you should be. You begin to recognize that the judgments, the criticisms, the endless comparisons, they were never yours to hold. They belonged to a world that valued conformity over authenticity, and now you choose to live on your own terms. You choose to trust the whispers of your heart over the clamor of external expectations. And that choice, though it may seem small, ripples out into every aspect of your life, transforming your relationships, your work, and even the way you see yourself. You start building a life around those desires, not a perfect life, but a present one. You stop filling your calendar to avoid your feelings. You stop trying to multitask your way out of discomfort. You slow down. You breathe deeper. You give yourself permission to change your mind, to change your path, to become someone your past self wouldn't recognize, but your future self will thank you for. And you begin to surround yourself with people who honor this version of you. People who don't just tolerate your growth, but celebrate it. People who don't ask you to go back to who you were. People who walk beside you, not ahead of you, not behind you, but with you, through the quiet, through the storm, through the sacred in-between. These are the people who understand that healing is not linear, that there will be days when you forget your progress, days when your inner critic is louder than your inner cheerleader, days when you need to be reminded of your own light. And on those days, you've learned how to show up for yourself. You've learned how to hold your own hand, how to rock your own heart, how to whisper to yourself, "You're okay, you're safe, I've got you." Because now you know that the most important relationship you'll ever have is the one you have with yourself. And when that relationship is rooted in love, everything else becomes clearer. Your boundaries, your purpose, your joy. Joy, you realize, isn't about perfection or control. It's about presence. It's about noticing. It's about laughing without knowing why. It's about dancing in the kitchen, crying during a sunset, hugging someone a little tighter than usual, saying, "I love you," without the armor of sarcasm. Joy lives in the ordinary, and now that you're paying attention, you see it everywhere. You've also stopped being so hard on yourself. You don't rush your healing anymore. You let yourself grieve slowly. You let yourself celebrate fully. You don't minimize your pain because someone else has it worse. You don't compare your path to anyone else's because you've realized no one has lived your life. No one has felt your exact ache. No one knows how brave you've had to be just to make it here. And you're proud of yourself, not in the boastful way, but in the sacred, steady way. The kind of pride that comes from surviving your own mind, from learning how to feel deeply and still choose love, from knowing that everything you've lost has made room for something real to be born. You've become real, not in spite of your scars, but because of them. And so you keep walking, not because you have somewhere to be, but because walking itself is a prayer, a devotion, a choice to keep showing up for this one wild, sacred, imperfect life. Because this life, just as it is worthy of your presence. And you, just as you are worthy of love. You begin to understand that the world doesn't need another version of you who performs, who conforms, who hides behind a mask just to be accepted. The world needs the real you, the one who breathes deeply, who speaks gently, who listens with presence, who lives with intention. And maybe for the first time in your life, you feel like that version of you is enough. That feeling doesn't come in a rush. It arrives slowly, through repetition, through choosing yourself day after day, through softening instead of hardening, through allowing instead of forcing, through remembering that healing is not a finish line, but a way of moving through the world, with awareness, with compassion, with love. There's a kind of wisdom that only comes from falling apart, from losing the things you thought defined you, from sitting in the ashes of your old life and realizing that maybe, just maybe, this is where real life begins. Not in the construction of a perfect image, but in the quiet rebuilding of your soul. You look back and see all the times you thought you were broken, and you realize now that you were simply being reshaped, that your heartbreaks cracked you open for a reason, that your disappointments cleared the path for truth, that the silence you once feared is now your sanctuary, and you're not angry anymore. You're grateful, because everything brought you here, to this moment, to this breath, to this version of you who finally sees the sacred in the ordinary. And when you begin to live from that place, from that reverence, everything changes. You start to slow down, not because you're lazy, but because you've stopped rushing to escape yourself. You find pleasure in simplicity, in the way sunlight filters through your curtains, in the warmth of tea against your palms, in the quiet joy of your own breath moving in and out without needing to be earned. You stop measuring your worth by how much you produce. You start measuring your life by how deeply you feel, how fully you show up, how gently you hold yourself in the chaos. You learn to listen, not just to others, but to the quiet voice within, the one that speaks not in commands,